Blog Talk Radio.
Greetings, Gus T Renegade and Justice, in for another program, The Cows, hopefully sharing constructive information about, racism, white supremacy, what it is, and how it works. Thank you for tuning into the broadcast. I'm going to begin this program with a passage from the book that we are going to examine today. This is page 35. The Germans then led 8 white officers and 60 to 70 black soldiers down the road to the next village. Near a field where 2 tanks were parked, the officers had to lie down. Meanwhile, the Germans ordered the black soldiers to assemble with raised hands in the field with the tanks and ordered them to start running as if attempting to escape. The 2 tanks then fired their machine guns and cannons at the fleeing black soldiers while driving over the wounded and dead. Close to 50 black soldiers were murdered in what an observer described as a Dante-esque vision of horror. Again, this is from page 39 of Hitler's African Victims, the German Army Massacres of Black French Soldiers in 1940. Our guest for today's program, in addition to authoring this fantastic book, he is a professor of history at Colby College in Maine. Very important. I feel like this information is frequently omitted. Hopefully our guests will be able to share some thoughts as to why this information is not a general part of the dialogue when people discuss the atrocities of Nazi Germany and World War II. Our guest for today's program, Professor Raffael Scheck. Professor Scheck, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Outstanding. Am I pronouncing your name correctly, sir?
Oh, that's perfect. Absolutely.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanna hop right into the book, but before we do, I guess, is there any background information you would like to tell our audience about yourself for folks who might not have read this book?
Oh, about myself, not much to say. I am born in Germany, raised in Germany and Switzerland. Went to Israel as a child. My father had a PhD fellowship there, and was treated very well as a German in Israel. Was very stunned by the power of forgiveness so soon after the Holocaust, and I came to study in America just because I liked the doctoral advisor I had, and it's a very European thing to do, to study with somebody whose work you admire. So I came to the United States and started teaching here. But I still have the accent, so I hope you can understand me despite my slight German accent. I learned English too late. I learned French and Italian first and English later.
Thus far, not a problem. It is a privilege to have you here, sir. I guess I'll go ahead and get started. You are a white man, is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I have unfortunately concluded that we are in a global system of racism, white supremacy, and I use those two words interchangeably, racism and white supremacy. The definition that I use for both racism and white supremacy is as follows. A global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you believe that such a system exists, and do you think that definition is accurate?
That's very hard to say in a short statement. So I'd be happy to talk about my book, but there are others who are much more qualified to speak about the larger ramifications of this.
Okay. Let's get to the book then. Hitler's African Victims, the German Army Massacres of Black French Soldiers in 1940. Exactly what was your purpose for writing this book?
Well, the purpose was to document a crime that had not received much attention. There was a lot of discussion of German army crimes in Eastern Europe, which were also motivated by racism, ideas of a lower-ranking Slavic race or lower-ranking Jews. But I had read as a graduate student that exactly about the massacre, which you presented so well, and in a French book, just a little sentence without a footnote. I did not know where this information came from, and I wanted to know, so I started writing to the archives in France and Germany. And this happened at a time when in Germany itself there was a lot of debate about the involvement of the German army in crimes during the Second World War. And I was always expecting to hear about the killing of these black prisoners of war, but I never did. So I figured I need to write this and show this and discuss this in its context.
Wow. Okay. You already kind of touched on it a little bit in reading your book. I was very impressed with the collection of sources that you gathered to construct this book. Can you kind of share, I guess, specific geographic locations where in the world you traveled to get or the sources that you used for this book, and also if you could include, because I think it's important, how many different languages you speak, because it seems like you had to read French sources, German sources, if you could kind of share some of that information.
I speak approximately 6. If you count some dialects, it's a little more, but the ones I needed, of course, were French and German and English, because there was some literature in English as well. But I traveled to France and to Germany, and I tried to understand when these massacres happened, what military situation was relevant for triggering a massacre. And for that, I needed to see the documents in Germany and also in France. So travel to some local archives, because in many cases in France, even though the French government did not do much at all to acknowledge these crimes, there were citizens, there were locals who began to gather signatures for building a monument to how well these black soldiers had fought, and they had fought extremely well in many places. It's not true that the French army just caved in when the Germans came in 1940, although that's popularly assumed. And so I gathered a broad array of local and national sources on both sides of the Franco-German border. I got some documents of some accounts of some survivors of these massacres were reported in the archives, and a few more have been found since I published the book in 2006.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's incredibly important for folks to hear, just the incredible resources that Professor Scheck was able to access to put this book together. I guess to start off, before we get into the actual murders, I think it's important to put all this in context. I wanted to start with World War I, not World War II. With World War I, and particularly what I guess is called the Black Horror on the Rhine. Can you kind of share some of that information with our audience and why that's relevant to these massacres?
Yeah. In the First World War already, the French and the British had declared that this was a war about culture and that the Germans were barbarians, that they were savages, that they were burning churches and committing unspeakable atrocities on children in Belgium. It's very powerful propaganda. This exaggerated, but very effective in drawing in a lot of support for the war in Britain, France. France, they didn't need it, but in Britain, and to some extent the United States. The German army responded to this argument by saying, well, you British and French, you claim that we are barbarians, but look at your armies, especially the French. You are mobilizing savages, and here they meant Africans, and you are sending them against us. So you are claiming to fight for civilization, and yet you mobilize savages. So that's a contradiction. And that's that type of argumentation from which the so-called Black Horror campaign came. After the First World War, France received the right to occupy some territory in West Germany, and everybody was war-weary. So the white people wanted to go home, white people from the French army. The black people also wanted to go home, but they were not allowed to, so they were sent into, some of them were sent into West Germany as occupation forces. Actually, the vast majority were North Africans. There were only a few people from West Africa. But now, the German Foreign Ministry discovered that in order to question the legitimacy of this occupation, which they hated, which everybody hated in Germany, not because of the black people in it, there were only relatively few, as I said, and those got along very well with the local population. They were treated very well by the local population, and they treated the local population very well. But the German Foreign Ministry found out quickly that it was a very convenient way of delegitimizing the French occupation by pointing out that there were non-Europeans in the French army, essentially some blacks and North Africans. And this campaign, sadly, was quite successful. It elicited a powerful response in the Vatican, in Italy, and in the United States, and in Britain too. Less so in France, but in many countries, the French occupation was discredited because of this campaign. And these images, and they are absolutely horrible, about raping black soldiers, and just, the statistics, the white French soldiers were much worse. The white German soldiers who had been stationed in the same area also behaved much worse. So this campaign is, in some sense, is part of the background to the propaganda that Hitler and his propaganda minister launched in the Second World War against black soldiers.
Wow. Um, extremely important information. I just, if I can summarize, would it be accurate to say that, was this the propagandist in Germany? This is Joseph, I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, Joseph Goebbels, is that?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. The campaign that these white people led in Germany was successful internationally, with the exception of white people in France, by appealing to racism, white supremacy, and specifically the image of sexually depraved, raping black males. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
A lot of the propaganda that took place after World War I and the black horror on the Rhine really centered around this sexual tension. And you talked about some of the images. Carl Goetz, I do not speak German, so I mean, I'm probably botching these names really badly. But he has medals with just incredibly despicable images of black African soldiers, and one of them has a white woman, looks like he's chained or tied to a huge penis. I guess it's supposed to represent a black soldier. Can you kind of comment about some of these images and things that were produced?
Yeah, they were extremely hateful, and they were certainly playing up an image of savages from Africa with black skin terrorizing the local population. And you have some of these medals on your website, I see, and they're more like that. And it was the guy who did this, Carl Goetz. Yeah, he was certainly radical rightist, but and there were some people on the radical right who went so far with this propaganda that they discredited it among the more moderates. But in the short run, they had quite a bit of success with this.
Why do you think this, and internationally, why do you think this was successful?
Well, some of the notions that this propaganda addressed, even maybe not as extreme, were present in other countries too. There was one of the supposedly one of the great defenders of Africans was a British socialist by the name of Morel, who had written extensively about the abuses in what was then called the Belgian Congo. This man became a spearhead of the campaign against the stationing of black troops in West Germany, because he basically argued that Africans are very good people, but they should stay in Africa, and if they can't be taken out of their context, or else they're just wild, and they will want to rape blonde women. That's not their fault. It's the fault of the French, who don't rein them in and control them. So very demeaning propaganda by supposedly a defender of Africans, and undoubtedly he had done great things in exposing the abuses in this Belgian colony, and which had triggered major changes. Not that all the abuses disappeared, but it certainly made a difference.
Again, Professor Raffael Scheck, our guest here at the Context of White Supremacy. I guess one of the things I saw, it's consistent, not only, as you said, this consistent theme worldwide of the raping black male, but a consistent theme, the black soldiers should not be used to fight, combat, or in any way do anything to harm or be in a position of power over white people. That Germans seem to appeal to this sense of, hey, this is global white supremacy. It is a total violation to have these black people in charge of us. Can you talk about that? Because I think that, and you touch in your book, that argument also was successful to some degree.
It was successful to some degree because, largely that is the notion on which the colonial empires rested. And this is in the 1920s. They are still two very, very large colonial empires, the British and the French, larger than ever before, after they divided the German colonial and the Turkish, of course, the Ottoman Empire possessions. So this is very much rhetoric that's current in the 1920s, in the age of colonialism. And it is still, to some extent also, even though the United States is not in the forefront of colonial powers, does have its colonies too, it's often overlooked. But it's, I don't know American history that very well, but I know that there's still there's a very repressive atmosphere, especially in the southern states in the United States, where this campaign finds some strong response, positive response.
Okay, so I think most folks, we got how the Germans perceived the black people. What I found interesting in your work, you talk about how the Germans racialized the French as well, and saying that this is a degenerate, dying group. And they're using, I think the term was a Negro or African blood infusion to support themselves. Can you kind of speak about the way that they racialized the white people in France?
That's a very perceptive point that you're making, and that's a crucial element of Nazi propaganda against France. A Nazi racism operates on two basic principles. One of them is that there's a strict hierarchy of races, higher races and lower races, and at the very bottom are the Jews. They're not just a low race in terms of lack of talent, but they are endowed with incredibly evil facilities by the Nazis. But the second principle is that mixing of races always pulls a race down in this hierarchy. So if you mix a higher member of a higher race with a member of a lower race, the resulting person will represent more characteristics of the member of the lower race. And the Nazis argued that the French had basically mixed with non-European and by definition, by Nazi definition, inferior people. And this is something that they used ruthlessly in 1940 in their propaganda, because they have this very unexpected victory against France in 1940 within a few weeks. It's completely amazing what the German troops in 1914 to 18 had not managed to do in 4 years, 4.5 years, to beat the British and the French in the West. They did in 2-3 weeks in 1940, basically deciding the battle and then forcing the French to surrender. And the Nazis used this victory to basically to present their racial theories as correct to the German people. They said, look here, we won so clearly because we are observing racial purity laws, and the French are not. The French have mixed too much with inferior races, and that's why they are weak, and that's why they lost. So they used this victory against France, which of course totally different reasons. They used this to bolster their own racial claims.
Wow, very interesting. And I want to make sure I point out for listeners, and I also found this in your book as well. It's not like the French, white people in France, are not also practicing racism, white supremacy, or colonialism. In fact, one of their themes for bringing the African troops to fight and assist them in World War II. In addition, they needed the help, but they said that we've been so good, we've brought civilization to these African people. Can you talk about, I guess, that real paternalistic attitude they had about how they had brought so much to these black people?
Yes, the French felt that the Africans owed them something because the French had brought civilization to them, and all these, what they perceived as this great education and these great ideas derived from the French Revolution. And so they felt that the Africans owed them something. And the French birth rate had been very low for a long time already. Has something to do with French inheritance laws. They had basically limited the family size because inheritance had to be split. So they were demographically increasingly at a disadvantage toward the Germans. The German population grew much more rapidly until 1914. And so that's why the French were more willing to use African soldiers even on European battlefields. They just had to. But I saw this, even some of the most enlightened French officers who went to great lengths to try to save many of these soldiers from massacres. So they really risked their own lives. But I still believe this, that these soldiers were fighting for France because they owed France something, because France had brought civilization to them. So that's still that idea.
Okay. I guess getting a little bit closer to what happened in these massacres in 1940. We already talked about how this propaganda campaign had kicked in, particularly talking about the Black Horror from World War I. In World War II, a lot of this seemed to be around the blacks as savages, and in particular perfidious, that they did not fight correctly, and they were mutilating German soldiers. Can you kind of help break that down for our listeners?
Yeah, that was already a stereotype in the First World War, and basically the Nazi propaganda claimed that the African soldiers, particularly the black Africans, they didn't say this about the North Africans, but that the people from West Africa, that they were mutilating German prisoners, that they were eating them, that they were cutting off their heads and their ears and so on. And whenever they found a German soldier with severe wounds, a German officer very often decided, well, this was clear evidence that there had been mutilation by African soldiers, and they used that as a justification, in quotation marks, for a massacre. Usually without an inquiry, which would have been even the German army regulation to do an inquiry first, but it wasn't deemed necessary to do that.
You bring up frequently that you feel that the evidence suggests that these claims of all these atrocities that the Senegalese troops committed against German soldiers were exaggerated. Why do you think that's the case?
They were vastly exaggerated, yeah. This is not to say that it did not happen. There were cases, I know that there were cases where it's very likely that this did happen, where French officers observed it, or in some cases, veterans, African veterans, later on told anthropologists about this. There are some notions in certain societies that cutting off part of defeated opponent's body is basically bringing you good luck, as a talisman. It's not an African thing. It was done by Europeans too. The Vikings, in fact, did that much earlier, and other Europeans have done this too. But of course, in the 19th century, that's no longer standard for Europeans. But this may very well have happened. I think there's evidence for that. But for the Germans, this was just vastly exaggerated. And I show that there were situations in which the white units of the French and the British army conducted themselves in a very similar way in terms of combat behavior, not mutilating prisoners, but still doing very similar things in combat behavior. But the white and the white French or British soldiers were then not massacred. They were complimented on their heroic and effective performance, and the blacks were, in many cases, were massacred. So, in that sense, there's a racist roster that made some German officers read reality in a distorted way. Some, I have to emphasize this, there are some who didn't buy into this and who said, no, I'm not going to kill anybody among my prisoners. That's against the Geneva Convention. And these people have French army uniforms, and they need to be treated decently, and bring them to the rear and bring them to safety, give them water, give them food, and that's it.
Why do you think it is that there was this difference in perception among a lot of the white German officers where white soldiers would do the exact same thing that the African soldiers were doing, and when they did it, it was, hey, wow, these are great troops, and when the Africans did it, oh my gosh, they're savages, and, there should be vengeance.
Yeah. Well, this is part of the success of Nazi propaganda insofar as they described what they believed were certain ways of fighting that were, in their eyes, typical for savages, in quotation marks. And when German officers saw that, and this was pretty easy to determine, that there were African troops on the other side of the front line, they read the behavior of these troops in exactly that light. And they were also terribly afraid of them, because they were, not all of them, but many of these units from French West Africa were very good. They were professionals. They had fought, some of them had fought in the 1920s in Morocco, and they were very good. They were some of the elite units of the French army. So, there was a good reason to be afraid of them, because they were good, but that fear became much stronger simply by virtue of their being black. And for the Germans, this is very different than for the French, or also for the Americans, I think, because for many German soldiers, this might very well be the first time that they see a black person in reality. So they're really afraid of them, and that leads to that perception of kind of perfidious behavior as well.
For folks out there who are listening, I didn't know what perfidious meant either. I had to look it up.
Sorry.
It means deceptive. Oh, no problem. It means deceptive, deceitful. So it was some sort of suggestion that the way the black soldiers were engaged in warfare was not correct. It was something underhanded about it. Like, you have rules of engagement that you're supposed to follow, and they were not following the rules. I also want to make this clear. You point out in your book consistently all of the things, other than the mutilations, which you say were exaggerated.
Yeah.
I guess the fighting from the rear, the use of a knife. What is it? Coups?
The coup, yeah. That's a big knife, about 1.5 foot long, that the West African troops used in close combat.
Okay. The Germans were really upset about those coups. They talked. That's a frequent bit in the propaganda. None of this stuff is against the rules of the Geneva Convention. None of this stuff in any way violates rules of warfare observed at that time. I just wanted to draw a comparison and to show how this sort of criminalization of non-white people is consistent. The same, this alienation, you said the Germans, they viewed black people as being really, really foreign. They hadn't seen them before. This fear and criminalization is so consistent. I see those exact same patterns even in what's happening in Arizona with the so-called illegal immigrants. You have it in the name. They're criminalized and a fear that they're going to do something. Do you see consistencies in the way that non-white people are referenced even today?
Again, that is very, very hard to generalize, and I do want to point out that a lot of this fear could be overcome, and I'm working now on a project on the captivity experience of French colonial soldiers, and I find again and again that the German guards often got along very well with them. They began feeling sorry for them because they were so far away from home. And there were still occasional manifestations of this brutal racism that led to the massacres in 1940. But in 1944-45, you have some French African soldiers who go back to Africa with a picture of them with their guard, and with a handwritten note on the back of the picture very friendly note, and I have tons of pictures that show German guards basically in a group with black prisoners on very good terms without weapons, even though that went against German army regulations. They're not supposed to mingle with prisoners regardless of color. They're not supposed to have pictures taken with them either. And so there was, I guess I like to see something optimistic in this too, and there was a way of overcoming these stark racist prejudices, which caused big problems for the French after the war, of course.
Okay. Yeah, you can Battle for Algiers if you want to watch a movie. There you go. That's why I said these French people do not get off. Nobody really gets off the hook in this story, but that's another program.
Yeah. Good one though. Interesting.
For sure. I guess before I move to the actual massacres, I did want to ask. I mean, the images and the terms that are used, the black horror on the Rhine. I just found that to be such a striking phrase. And Rhineland bastards and these coins. I'll ask you, when I consistently hear all of this fear and trepidation about the use of C.O.W.S, which is a knife, as you said, a fairly large knife, I think of that as a phallic symbol. Is that logical? Do you think there could be a connection there, particularly looking at this coin that came out during the same time period?
Yes, that is definitely a motif that you can find in that propaganda, and I think that's a way, certainly possibility to interpret this. Yeah, there is an article on that of a woman in Germany who claims exactly that issue, and I think there's some evidence for it. Yeah.
Wow, I would love to read that article. Could I shoot you an I was going to make that request. Can I shoot you an email after the program? And
sure, yeah.
Perhaps if you can.
It's actually it's cited in my book. It's by Sandra Maas, M-A-S-S, but I think it's in German, if I remember correctly.
Sandra Maas, okay. Outstanding. I'll share. If I get it, the folks listening in, I'll share. I'll connect it with the program. Okay, with the actual massacres, and I guess I'll make a quick anecdote. I do think it's very consistent, the criminalization and fear of non-white people. I do think it's very consistent, enough that you can see general and wide patterns worldwide. Even I can just throw a quick anecdote. What happened, the massacre, the prison uprising in Attica, 1970s, exact same thing. The white people said that the black inmates had slit the throats of the guards, and it ended up not even being true. But you'll see lots of patterns of that. I think I could be incorrect, but with the actual massacres that took place in May and June 1940, can you kind of share some of the details of how these slaughters took place, and just more information with our audience about those?
Yeah. Well, the typical case was that an officer, German officer, became convinced that the Africans fighting for the French had committed some violation of the rules of war. And this officer then decided on his own to basically exact what he believed was revenge. This was illegal. It was illegal by the German army guidelines, by every international standard. But it had been done in the First World War, and there were some older commanders sometimes who believed that they could still do this. And what they did then was that they gathered all the prisoners, and they lined up, they basically separated the whites and the North Africans from the black soldiers, mostly the people from French West Africa, so Senegal, Ivory Coast, and all those colonies then. And they led the blacks away, guarded by a couple of soldiers, and then sometimes they abused them, taking off their belts and whipping them. In some cases, they just immediately lined them up and machine gunned them, usually without white French witnesses. The whites had been led to a different direction, but they came across the rows of corpses afterwards. And I have a few pictures that very likely show a massacre, because there are all these bodies of black soldiers right next to each other. And from all I know about combat, they would not have been killed in combat in such a fashion, because they usually dispersed or they were hidden. They were not just in one line. And there was another type of massacre where, and this is something that's extremely difficult to track down, because there were no written records, but it was very easy for a German unit, for example, to say, we are not going to take any prisoners when they're fighting against a French black unit, and just basically ignoring any pleas for surrender and killing everybody. Now, this was sometimes done probably mutually, in the sense that the French troops also didn't take prisoners in that area. That communicated itself very quickly, and then they wouldn't let anybody live anymore. But this becomes clear in statistics when I look at the people killed from the French army and the people taken prisoner from the French army. And I've looked at these lists, and there are, in some cases, like there are 2,400 black soldiers dead, 24 captured alive. If you look at the white prisoners, 24 white prisoners dead, 2,500 captured alive. So this speaks a very clear language, in my opinion. And
Is there? Oh, I was just going to ask: is there resistance? Are there people who say, this is exaggerated? These massacres didn't happen, or certainly the numbers you list that at least 1,500 to 3,000 African soldiers were slaughtered in this manner. Are there a lot of people who say that that's just not true?
In the press in Germany has been very open about this. I mean, they've been dealing with these absolutely horrific facts from the Nazi period for so long, and they're very, very open about it. But I have gotten threatening emails from radical right organizations, from people who say that basically one article said that I had made up everything, that there was no evidence for these massacres, that I was paid by the CIA. I wish. But if you saw my office, you would see I'm definitely not paid by anybody except by my college. And they said that I was basically hired by some Jews, because I had gone to a university that the radical right sees as a Jewish university, and so I've been hired by the CIA and the Jews. And they found out that I had once had a career as a musician in my youth, and I said I should have stayed with it, because it's good to use fantasy as a musician, but it's terrible if you do it as a historian. So basically, I invented it all. And I got some threatening emails from people who had these blogger names like Blonde Poison or Thor the Warrior. But those were extremely exceptional. The vast majority of reactions was very positive. And I went on a book tour in Germany in the last fall, and there's so much interest in it that I'm going back for another one this fall. So.
Wow.
Yes, there's great willingness to confront this, and that's nice.
Wow. Okay.
Sometimes so much so that they didn't like it, that I made differentiations. That's when they wanted this to be much bleaker than it actually was. They wanted all of the French black prisoners having been killed by the Germans. And I said, no, not everybody. And there were some decent people in the German army too at all times who saved some of them, and they didn't want to hear that. They wanted. So Germans have a very different approach to their past, I think, now than they had immediately after the Second World War.
Wow. Again, real treat to have him on the program. Our guest, Professor Raffael Scheck, author of Hitler's African Victims. The the black soldiers, they couldn't have been ignorant. They had to know, hey, we are black. There's no way we can hide. And they have a total contempt for us. Can you kind of talk about their state of mind in this situation?
Yes, they were quite perceptive. And ironically, some of the French officers, the white French officers, had told them that the Germans would massacre them before that had even happened, because the French white officers wanted these guys to fight very, very hard without thinking of retreating. And the African soldiers sometimes took that quite seriously, and that's part of the reason why they fought very, very hard in many instances, because they expected to be massacred. And then when they fought very hard, it was almost like a vicious circle. Some of the German commanders believed that it was a sign of this savage African who just doesn't give up and keeps fighting and uses all sorts of illegitimate ways to keep fighting, so that reinforced itself. The Africans, many of the Africans are very much afraid of looming captivity. Rightly so, of course. Quite a few were massacred, and the majority who were not massacred experienced extreme hardship in the first couple of months in 1940 after they were captured. And so I can understand that they were very much afraid. They did not have the way out that some of the white French soldiers had, namely just take off your uniform and put on civilian clothes and mingle with crowds of refugees and say that you are a civilian from the invaded areas. They did not have that opportunity. So they basically had to stand, and stand they did in many places, fought very hard.
Wow. In your book, you talk about just incorrect treatment and abuse in general, not just the massacres, which is despicable in itself, but you talk about corpses not being allowed to be buried. This happened to black troops. Not being given shelter in hazardous weather conditions. Can you talk about some of the other abuses that these troops had to face?
There was an order in one specific place, and I have not since found evidence that this was done all over France, although some people have understood it that way. But there was an order in one specific place in France where the German commander ordered that no dead black soldiers could be buried, that they had to be left out in the fields under all circumstances. And because the argument was given that they had not fought like honorable men, that they had fought like savages, and therefore they didn't deserve a hero's burial that the white French soldiers got. Civilians from those areas often buried them secretly on their own at night, and secretly marked their graves, and after the war went back there and erected tombstones and made cemeteries. Some of the other abuses, there was a hierarchy and I have this from some Africans who later wrote about captivity. Hierarchy was that British prisoners were the first in the line of prisoners of war being marched to the rear, often over a very long distance. They got water, they got food. The French white prisoners were the second in line, and they got some water and some food, but worse than the British. And then came the North Africans, who got a little water and a little food, and then came the black, and they got no water and no food. There were some sadistic guards who basically looked away, trying to goad some black prisoners, to go to a fountain nearby, and when they did so, shot at them, said, "Hey, you got out of line, you deserve to be shot." So it's just awful experience. It wasn't fun for anybody, not for the British either. Top of the line. It's a very, very difficult period. Not enough for anybody, but it was distinctly more miserable for the black people at the end. But this changed almost completely in August 1940. Nazi Germany suddenly became interested in becoming a colonial power in Africa, maybe. And this, of course, this treatment of black French soldiers did not make very good propaganda for a future Nazi colonial empire in Africa. So the treatment changed completely in most cases, with a few exceptions, by August 1940.
And that, just making sure our listeners are clear, that change was not motivated by any humane concerns or change of heart for the Senegalese troops, but the German interest in practicing racism, white supremacy, also known as colonialism, in Africa. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's not clear to what extent Hitler personally committed to this, because his project, his huge racist project, was always in Eastern Europe. And he didn't pay that much attention to Africa himself. There were some people in his party who were very serious about this, and they even began issuing money, currency, for some of the former German colonies that Germany lost at the end of the First World War. They were very serious about it. But Hitler really, I think he didn't make up his mind. His priority was always huge, what he called living space in Eastern Europe, leading to the decimation, deportation, murder of millions of people, mostly Russians, Poles, and Jews, and that was his big priority.
You talked about that this hierarchy that we have during this time period. It even plays out with Africans. Can you kind of talk, because that was brought up specifically even with the propaganda, that they really wanted to demonize the darker Africans, the northern Africans who were a little bit lighter complexion. They wanted a distinction made between those two. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah. Well, the Nazis themselves actually thought quite highly of the North Africans. This is, to some extent, pragmatism, because the Germans in the First World War had already appealed to the Muslims in the Middle East, because the Muslims were largely under British and French control, and the Ottoman Empire, which at that time was a huge empire, included Mecca, included much of today's Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Palestine, Lebanon, all these territories, Syria. The Ottoman Empire fought on the side of Germany, so the German emperor in the First World War basically encouraged the Ottoman Sultan to declare a jihad, holy war, against the British and the French. And Hitler sort of liked this, and he had the, in his view, the added advantage of being a radical anti-Semite, and so he tried to appeal to hatred of Jews among the North Africans and the people in Palestine as well, in order to destabilize the French and the British colonial empires. And so the North Africans were considered much better people in Nazi racial hierarchy. But as with so much else, they were inconsistent. They didn't know what they were really doing, what they really should be doing. One of the greatest ironies is that there is no purebred German. If I look at my ancestors, 3 of my grandparents have Slavic last names. So I would have passed for a German under the Nazi rules, but 3 of my grandparents obviously are derived from what the Nazis considered a much, much, much lower race. And Hitler himself probably had Slavic ancestry too. There's been so much mixing in Central and Eastern Central Europe. It's just absurd to even speak about stable racial categories. That just doesn't exist.
I think that applies for all of these so-called racial classifications, that it is absurd to talk about some sort of stable racial classification, any of them. But that hierarchy, you touched on it, that hierarchy is present not just, or I guess before I get to that, you point out in the book that with regards to having a higher regard for North Africans, the propaganda campaign worked so well that oftentimes the Northern Africans ended up being perceived just like the darker Africans because the program worked so well. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. For the most part, the North Africans were not massacred, but there were some German officers and some soldiers as well who simply didn't know how to distinguish, and anybody who had slightly darker skin than they themselves, that person they categorized as West African, and in some cases that led to massacres in 1940.
That this white supremacist hierarchy also plays out not just in Africa, but the continent of Europe as well. You see, you wrote about it in your book, the Western Europe, these people are treated better than Eastern Europe. The further you go east, it starts to become more racial, and it starts to sound much more like we are not considering these people white folks. Can you talk about that as well?
That's certainly the heart of Nazi racial ideology, that people in the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union, are of a lower stock, and because they are of a lower stock, they have given Jews more opportunity to intermarry with them and to lead them even further down. This is all seen in an extremely crude way, as if it was biology and there were parasites affecting a weak plant, for example, and leading it to be diseased and then dying. That's the essence of Nazi racism. And they even classified the Germans, and they had 6 major categories into which they put the Germans. And the irony is that none of the top Nazi leaders qualified in any way for the top category. How many Nazis do you know who were tall, blonde, and blue-eyed? It's not a single one. They should have sterilized themselves if they had applied their own criteria to themselves. So this is just so wildly contradictory. Well, of course, I don't have to preach that to you. I sometimes have to preach that to people who deny the Holocaust. I get these cards and letters every other week from a Holocaust denier who claims that no, there were no people gassed in Auschwitz, could not have been possible, and I guess I have to say it.
Wow. I want to give some of the folks opportunity who called in to ask some questions, but before I do, I just found the book incredibly informative. I was jotting down footnotes, and I have so many other books now that I want to check out from reading your work. I felt extremely ignorant, though, reading this, because I'd never heard about any of this. I'd never even heard it hinted at. Why do you think this has been omitted from so much of the dialogue around what happened during World War II and the Nazi atrocities?
Yeah, well, very few people had heard about it at all, and that's why the book caused such a surprise. Well, the reason is probably complex, but the French authorities who were charged with indicting German war criminals after the war, they were just not very interested in these issues because, well, first of all, because the massacres that the Germans had conducted against French civilians and against Free French troops, white troops, they took center stage. That was what they first wanted to clear up and punish. And then by the time they had done that, they were just not very interested in pursuing these massacres. They touched on embarrassing thing for France, namely this crushing defeat of May and June 1940. And it also came into a context where the French state tried very, very hard to rebuild the colonial empire. And the last thing they wanted, the government wanted at that point, was to have soldiers from Africa who had served for the French army and who were very restive at the end of the war. They're not treated very well. They're not given all of the money that they're due. They are neglected, and they experience racism even among the Free French, who they think fight on the good side. And the last thing the French government wanted after the Second World War was to make a big thing of massacres of black soldiers who had fought so well for France in 1940. And I think that that influenced this lack of attention. And in Germany, there were those people who had, of course, committed these massacres, but they chose to be quiet about them. And the majority just never heard about them. It's changing now. There's a German office for the prosecution of Nazi war crimes, and they have opened a case. I've given them all of my materials and have an email that I have to answer. They're very close to starting now investigation and a trial against some of the surviving officers who might have been involved in this.
Wow. At least at the time of publication, there had been no prosecutions of anyone for these slaughters. Is that accurate?
No, there hadn't been any. That's true. The only, actually, I have to specify this. There was one prosecution during the war of a German soldier that I've only learned recently, who just without any provocation shot a black soldier. And the officer who witnessed this said, well, this is a crime. You can't just do that. And he wasn't sentenced to death, but he got a pretty stiff punishment. But that's the only case that I know of. I know one case in which SS soldier was put on trial because he had refused to follow an order to shoot a black officer. But then, even under Nazi Germany, the laws were that this was illegal. He couldn't shoot anybody as a prisoner of war, and so this man was then couldn't be punished for having done essentially the right thing, but he was kicked out of the SS, about which he must have been very glad, because after 1945 it's a good thing for him.
Wow. Yeah, just an incredible story. I even linked one of the articles that you listed, Robert W. Kessling, Blacks Under the Swastika. Check that out. Very interesting. I just felt very ignorant reading this book. I'm glad I was able to read it, and just delighted you were able to come hang out on the program. And I'm going to the phone line. Let's see. I believe this is Mr. Miro. Mr. Miro, if you have a question and are available to chat, your line is open, sir. Mr. Miro, are you there? Your line is open. Okay. I will check back in a hot second. Maybe he's having difficulties. Let's see.
I hope I didn't bore him.
Not at all. Anybody, if you were listening to this program, you should not be listening to the cows, because I suspect this is very informative. I have learned a ton, and if you find it boring, please find a different program. Last four digits, 6232. 6232. If you have a question for Professor Scheck, your line is open.
No questions right now, just listening.
Great. Thank you for listening in. Let's see. I believe this back of the bus. Are you there? Do you have any questions? Your line is open, sir.
Yes, sir. I am here. I'm listening at this time. Thank you both for sharing, though, and interview was very informative, and I do look forward to reading the book and checking out that article.
Outstanding. Great. Anybody, if you should change your mind, you can press 1 so you can get a hand up, then I can see that you have a question. One of the things that you pointed out, because I was a little confused when I went to get your book, I noted that there is also a book, Hitler's Black Victims.
Yes.
Totally different book. Similar subject, but totally different book. Mr. Lucene, he is a non-white person. He's also in this area of the world, United States. You cited it in your book, so I assume you knew about his before you wrote your book. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess you talk about the difference being the sources that book. Well, I guess, you can share. What do you think are some of the differences between his work and your work?
Well, his scope is much broader. He is looking at anti-black racism in Nazi Germany in general, and not only at the massacres. So he has a much broader scope. I am looking at the German army in particular, and I'm trying to place my work into the larger discussions about the German army. And after all, I'm a historian of Germany, a German historian, so that's my special area.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I want to read that book as well. I've been attempting to try to get that author on the program as well, so hopefully we can kind of continue this subject and get more of this information out. If folks, if you have any questions, get a hand up in the next couple seconds. Other than that, I will get ready to wrap up with Mr. Scheck, and then we can finish up with the program. I'll give you all about 60 quick seconds. You said that you are following up, that they are there's currently an effort to look at prosecutions in Germany for some of these crimes? Yes,
there's going to be prosecution. There must be some people still alive who are going to be investigated, and they, of course, would be very old by now. But I think it's a very good thing. It will give more publicity to this issue in Germany, and it's just a matter of justice as well. Even if these men are in their 90s now, they should still be prosecuted.
Wow. I will definitely be keeping my eye out for that.
Yeah. That's what the German state has done to Holocaust criminals as well, and it's only right that they look at people who ordered these massacres or who participated in them.
Wow. Yeah, as I will be, do have a hand. Okay. Back of the bus, your line is open. Go right ahead, sir.
Greetings. Professor, you mentioned earlier some German officers found it difficult to differentiate between individuals from North Africa and West Africa. Was there differentiation? Was the difference based on the geographical location or a color being darker and lighter?
In the eyes of the German, it was the color, the skin color, and the average German soldier had little information by which to judge whether this was supposed to be a North African or a West African. The North Africans have been predominantly Arabic speakers, but I think few Germans would have known this.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for calling in, sir. I appreciate it. Looks like everybody is content. Don't see any more hands. Press 1. Give you 10 seconds. Press 1 if you have a question. As I said, I learned there we go. Okay, people are getting their act together. Mr. Nero, your line is open if you have a question for Professor Scheck.
Greetings. Yes, I do. I unfortunately missed portions of the show because I'm at work. But Professor Schiff, I heard you mention that you are a German historian.
Yeah.
Sir, can you tell me when did Germany, when did they get a black population? When was there a documented, presence of black people in Germany?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There basically was a black presence in Germany ages ago. It goes back to antiquity, very, very long time. It was very small, but there were always black people in Germany. Through various contacts, through various armies, through trade, through also there's a German historian who's working about this. In the period right before the Second World War, there's a very small African or German African community in Germany, and these were some people who had left the former German colonies in Africa and gone to Germany. Some people in mixed marriages, and some as students going to German universities. There was also a significant group of circus artists, and this is not, I don't think it's in the book, is not so relevant for the massacres, but there were exhibits of African villages in zoos at the time, not only in Germany, in France too, and I think in New York, even in New York City, where Africans built up a African village similar to right next to the elephant cage or the giraffes, and of course that's also aspect of that racism. So there were some people who were related to circuses or artists who were black in Germany, but it was a very small population, mostly urban. So for many of the country folk, they probably hadn't really seen a black person before.
So Germany didn't have any black slaves during the enslavement era?
No, Germany did not have colonies until very late. They acquired their first colonies in the 1880s, and they did not have slaves black slaves in Germany.
Interesting.
They had people who, in the eastern parts of Germany, were until the early 19th century were treated quite awfully, and they were not exactly slaves, but they were called serfs, and they also had very, very few rights. They couldn't be sold anymore, but they were in a very inferior position. And this system existed in Russia as well, in much of Eastern Europe.
No, what do you mean by they couldn't be sold anymore?
Well, in Russia, under the system of serfdom, it was possible to basically sell a serf like a slave. They were considered the property of noblemen, of a landlord who owned all the land. And the serfs, there's no major racial difference. They were the same skin color as the noblemen, but they were considered they were considered like the cattle. They could be sold. They could be ordered to procreate, for example, to have children, because they needed more labor force on the farm. That's a system that the Russian state abolished only in 1861. So 99 years before my birth. Very recent, too.
Interesting. Well, that'll be all for now. I don't want to hog up the time, Gus.
Well, I really appreciate your interest. And I want to say this more generally. I'm very grateful for all of your interest. I mean, Gus, Renegade, and all the listeners. I published this book, and it seemed like almost nobody in America cared what happened to Africans serving in the French army. It was a huge issue in France. It was a huge issue in Germany. But in America, almost nobody seemed to care.
Why do you think that is?
I wish I knew. I think many people don't know that the French used a lot of blacks in both world wars. And maybe when you don't know that, there are other issues that take precedence. And of course, I mean, the Nazis killed almost 6 million Jews, and that's always been at the forefront because it's a much, much larger type of massacre and genocide. But I still think this is important too.
I agree wholeheartedly. We had 2 other folks called in now. My view, quickly, is that racism, white supremacy, is why I suspect in this area of the world you don't have a large interest in this work, because black people have been conditioned to disconnect themselves from Africans and to see them as the same way the propaganda worked in Germany, to see them as uncouth savages that they have no connection to at all. So a lot of black people would not be interested, and white people, I think you have a lot of racism, white supremacy, so they're not interested in this either. I could be incorrect, but that'd be my guess as to why.
I just have to say that the scholarly community, the historians, have been very interested and very appreciative about the book. I really have to say that among the professional historians in the United States and in Canada, there's been great interest. But my college tried to get it on the radio, and it didn't seem that the public media were that interested in it.
Wow. We are thankful to have you here on the cows. I'm very interested in it, and we have a full switchboard, so people are appreciative as well. Whoever the person that called in most recently with a hand up, your line is open if you want to ask your question.
Can I be heard?
Yes, loud and clear.
Thanks for taking my call, Gus. A question for your guest is, do you think that if everyone loved each other, and if everyone did love each other, that white supremacy itself would disappear, and white people themselves might disappear off the face of the planet?
I'm not that much of an optimist that I think everybody will love each other. I think it would be a good start to treat each other with respect and decency and interest, mutual interest. I think that would be a great start. And maybe that would have great side effects also on the way we treat nature, our environment, and might help the survival of the human race. I don't know. That's a philosophical topic. I'm a historian.
Person, last four digits, 6232. Your line is open if you want to ask your question.
Hello, I had one question I wanted to ask. I remember learning that before they had concentration camps in Germany for the Jewish people, that they had first practiced it on Africans, the Germans had, and done like all kind of experiments and things on them. And I wanted to know, was any reparation ever made to those people for that treatment by Germany?
There are two questions in there. The first one about the experiments on black people. I don't think it is true for Nazi Germany. There was a ferocious episode in German colonial history in 1904 to 7 in what is today Namibia.
Okay.
And that is, and some historians, although not everybody agrees on this, some historians see a connection between what the German army practiced on the Herero and the Nama, two peoples in Namibia, is in some ways a predecessor to the Holocaust. And I think there's I make some of that argument in my book insofar as I trace the continuity of these images of armed black people that motivate massacres in 1940. In terms of reparations, I don't know the answer at this point. I know that there are efforts to do this with respect to the people in Namibia from the German government, or that there are judicial proceedings working, but I don't know where they stand right now.
Okay, thank you.
But the first people to be gassed in some of the worst camps, like Auschwitz, were Russian POWs, Russian prisoners of war. They were sent in for the trial run, so to speak.
Wow. As I said before, I am really, really appreciative we were able to pull this program off. The book, again, Hitler's African Victims, the German Army Massacres of Black French Soldiers in 1940. Our guest, Professor Raffael Scheck. Thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us. Thoroughly enjoyed the book. I'm going to be recommending it to all of the black folks that I know. Read this book, very important. I thoroughly appreciate it, and I will definitely be sending you that email to get that article. And I also, any books or articles that you could recommend just on the propaganda that was produced during that time period, that would be phenomenal. If you could, when you get a moment, if you could, I'll shoot you an email and you could just send it to me. That would be great.
Yeah. Well, I thank you very, very much for your interest. That's really great. I really appreciate that a lot.
Thank you so much, sir. Take excellent care. Keep up the great work, and I will be in touch soon.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Pleasure talking to you.
You too. Context of White Supremacy, Gus T Renegade.Is. Hopefully you found the program constructive. I have several tidbits, and I'll open up the line so folks can share their thoughts before we wrap up. But yeah, I'm going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back. Context of White Supremacy, Gus T Renegade.Is. We'll be right back.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At CounterRacism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by CounterRacism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
Context of White Supremacy, Gus T Renegade and Justice. I want people to scroll down and look at those images. Yeah, those images were not in the book, by the way. Gus had to do some digging, some extracurricular research to find those images. But boy, research paid huge dividends on that. I'm glad that he looked at the show page and saw those images so that I have white authentication that this is not Photoshop. Gus did not go get some skills and hang out on a Mac and make this up. This is the real deal. This is racism, white supremacy, circa 1920. The gentleman who put these images together, he said his name, C.O.W.S. G-O-E-T-Z. You can Google it, and you'll find a lot of these coins. You'll find a lot of these coins, and you'll see more of this sort of imagery that was cranked out of Nazi Germany. They have other books that just talk about the racism in Germany with regards to black people, and it's the same ogreish, apish images that you see in this area of the world. But take a moment and look at those coins, particularly the bottom one. Look at those coins for a second. I'll hush. I mean, wow. I'll even translate what the bottom coin says. The bottom coin. What that says, the German that's written on the coin, it says the black shame. The black shame. That is the translation. The black shame. Okay, the top coin, what that says is to awake in the Rhine, as though you wake up in Germany to this sitting outside of your house. At least that's the way I take it, but that's the translation, to awake in the Rhine being Germany. But I mean, whoa, racism, white supremacy. And look at that bottom coin. You see the pyramid there? You got the all-seeing eye. I know that means some things to people. I mean, incredible. Yeah. Check out the images, context of white supremacy. I wanted to address in order. Number one, I felt incredibly ignorant. I am ignorant. I think I've said that repeatedly on the program. This should not be a surprise or news to anyone. I am ignorant. I am a victim of racism, white supremacy. Man, to speak to someone who speaks six dialects, to be able to speak French fluently enough to, I don't know, travel to France and read books written in French and be able to do the same thing in German. Wow, I feel incredibly ignorant. But, you know, that is racism, white supremacy. Non-white people frequently do not get the same educational opportunities, don't have the same access to resources as a result of racism, white supremacy. But I did want to point that out. And I felt that was very important, too. That's why I always say I believe white people are much more informed about racism, white supremacy, what it is, and how it works. Just access to information is astounding. That was why I wanted to point that out at the very beginning of the program, that he was able to do, you know, traveling and just get access to an incredible amount of information to compile this book. And it makes the book just really enjoyable and incredibly informative because he got so much great information from all over the world to support, you know, what he's saying in his book. I also wanted to point out, because in the book he mentions Leopold Sedar Senghor. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He is the first non-white black president in Senegal. He and Frantz Fanon, they are considered the fathers of a movement called Negritude. You can research it, check it out, but it's Frantz Fanon, Leopold Sedar Senghor, and another non-white person. They are considered the fathers of this movement. He mentions, I believe, Mr. Senghor, he was a participant in World War II. He's from Senegal. I believe he was one of the black soldiers who participated in World War II. He was mentioned in Professor Scheck's work, so I found that very interesting. Also found it relevant because, of course, in addition to Frantz Fanon being married to a white person, Leopold Sedar Senghor also married a white person. Next, for anybody, and I said I am going to the phone lines. I see folks called in. I'm going to the phone lines. Anybody, if, as I didn't say it at the beginning of the program, so I'll say it now. If you do not think the C.O.W.S is constructive, if you do not get information that you can use to better your understanding of racism, white supremacy, to aid you in solving problems, please invest your time and energy in something else. I do not want people wasting time hanging out here if the program is not constructive. So please, if you find it of constructive value, that's great. If not, please support someone else's effort or come up with your own project. Use your imagination, your creativity, and use your time and energy to do something that would be constructive as opposed to wasting time here. But I did want to say, anybody, if they found this program constructive, those images at the bottom, now that you have some more background information as to how they were constructed, why they were constructed, what they mean, now that you can put those images in context. If you found this program of constructive value, please share. That's what you can do for me. I think anybody, if you're familiar with the work of Dr. Francis Cress Welsing and the ISIS papers, just that bottom image alone, this program should have immense value. So share the program. Please put it on Facebook, put it on Twitter. Tell your friends. You can email it to them. It would be really great, my request, if you found this particular program of constructive value, you could put my player on your blog. If you have a blog or any website where you can put in a little bit of HTML code to add a widget and what have you, put this program on your blog. It doesn't have to be this particular episode, but it can be, or you can put the multiplayer. That way you'll have the last, I think, 4 or 5 episodes of the cows. People will be able to listen to it right from your page. They won't have to navigate away. You can put one program up, so it'll just be whatever the most recent program is. People can listen to it right from your page, but share the information. If you think it's valuable, I don't need a high five. I don't need a smoothie in the mail. Just share the information so that we can replace the system of racism, white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Before I get to the next one, he mentioned towards the end, very informed. I'm incredible. I felt super ignorant with Professor Scheck, very informed white man. But he talked about the circuses. That's how some of the black people ended up in Germany. Those circuses are extraordinary illustrations of racism, white supremacy. I think Adabinga has been mentioned on this program before. Hopefully I can do a program on that, because there are whole books just about Adabinga and his participation in these circuses. And Professor Scheck was correct. They did have these circuses in this area of the world, the United States. Adabinga was here, and not just in New York. They had them in St. Louis. They had the World's Fair, I believe, in St. Louis, and they had these same sorts of racist exhibitions with black people, Native Americans. Adabinga was there. He's from the area of the world known as the Congo. At that particular time, this is the early 1900s. King Leopold and white people in Belgium, they were the ruling white supremacists in Belgium, the Belgian colony of the Congo, if you will. But yeah, that was very interesting, and that stuff happened all over. Lots of just ugly, blatant racism, white supremacy. They had some of these exhibitions with Adabinga. They had him in a cage, and they would throw in bones so that he could look like a cannibal and a savage. A lot of the same propaganda that we just talked about that was used during World War II. But yeah, I thought that was very very interesting. Let's see. Reading. If Back of the Bus was still with us, I would let him do it. I was talking to him. I'll at least give credit. Back of the Bus. Support his blog, nonwhitealliance.wordpress.com. Again, nonwhitealliance.wordpress.com. I don't remember who it was, but someone commented. I had talked about the importance of reading. If you read, you can get a lot of information about racism and white supremacy. I'm not saying that's the only way you can become informed about racism and white supremacy, but there are a lot of books that have phenomenal information about how all this works. The book we covered today, Hitler's African Victims, great one. Yeah, someone commented when I was trying to share tips about reading before. Someone commented, yeah, reading's important, but it's boring. And I was speaking with Back of the Bus, and he said for a victim of racism and white supremacy to say that reading is boring, what they mean when they say boring, this goes against my conditioning. Outstanding observation by Back of the Bus, and my view is that Back of the Bus is accurate. Under the system of white supremacy, any victim of racism and white supremacy who says, I find this boring, I strongly suspect that what they really mean is that this goes against my conditioning. I believe Rajan Prasad, author of Why Black Men Love White Women, when he was on the program yesterday, he said the black people that love Tyler Perry films and seeing him in a dress and all the buffoonish entertainment that is tossed in our direction, we have been trained, carefully groomed to find this appealing and humorous. So yeah, that was my thought about reading, and I hope this program illustrates the importance of reading. There are just a ton of books out there that have great information. Yeah, and I would just say anybody who says reading is boring, I probably don't want to be around that person too long, because reading is essential. I mean, wow. Anything that is constructive, where I'm learning, it's assisting me solve problems, I don't find that boring at all. I didn't find any aspect of reading Hitler's African victims boring. Now, it's not, going to Disney World. Don't get me wrong. It's not going to Disney World. It's not going out hiking. It's not being engaged with sexual intercourse. Yeah, there are other things that are more stimulating than reading. But if I am reading a book that has constructive information, I find that, hey, that's great. That's great. And most of the books that most of the books that we've talked about on this program, it has not been boring to read those books for me. It has been very interesting. But, hey, I would encourage folks, if you are reading some books that are boring, perhaps you should find different books. That used to be a problem for me. The books that I was reading, they weren't really of interest to me. They weren't of constructive value. I wasn't really getting skills as a result of reading the books. And I wasn't really learning about racism, white supremacy, so I didn't find them as interesting. But I would say if your problem, or if the reason that you're not interested in reading is that you find it boring, pick different books and see if that changes things. Let's see. Next, flash forward. If I was really, 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 really hustling, and I am. We had a show yesterday, a show today, and a show every day until Tuesday. I am hustling. We'll be back tomorrow, all weekend long, Monday and Tuesday. I am hustling. But if I was extra, extra hard hustling, we would be doing another show today, because the season finale of Flash Forward is tonight, and I am looking for more racism, white supremacy, the propaganda. I'm expecting it to be there. Gabrielle Union, her character, she's now got blonde hair. I don't know when that happened. I saw her she's not in every episode, so I saw her last week, and she had blonde hair. I don't know what's going on, or I do know what's going on with that. Just other things, real interesting. Yes, I don't think it's going to happen, because I need to prep for tomorrow's program and all the programs for this weekend, so I don't think it's going to happen today. But, yeah, Flash Forward series finale is tonight. They canceled the show, so this will be the last program. But I definitely want to do a series wrap for Flash Forward, because there have been a lot of incidents of racism, white supremacy. Let's see. I had one more thing, and then I opened the phone lines. I guess it's just funny. For people who saw The Matrix, I did kind of feel like I was talking to the Merovingian a little bit. If you saw The Matrix, he's in the second one and the third one. He can speak lots of languages and all that. I did kind of have that feeling. Next up, I got an email from a non-white person, I believe. I haven't met this person, so I don't know. But she listens to the program, and she sent me an email. I will not say her name, but I will share what she wrote in. She said, I, Gus, have mentioned that I've lived in Atlanta and that I now live in Seattle, and that I also live in California. There are more libraries in Seattle. This is her talking. I don't know if you are familiar with the black play that came out in the 70s. Maybe before your time. It's called No Place to Be Somebody. I have not seen this play. I've never heard of it. What was your experience with blacks, non-whites, African Americans in Atlanta? Is there any place to be somebody? Brother Baruti, that's Dr. Mwalimu K. Baruti, he's been on the program twice, is in Atlanta, and has commented on the sad state of black consciousness. I have lived in several cities and have found the paradox. If you live around blacks, the access to educational materials is difficult. The food in the stores is more suspect. If you read too much, quote unquote, you're looked at with suspicion. Transportation is worse, etc. Yet, to my knowledge, there is no place to be somebody. Even conscious blacks look upon each other with suspicion. Camaraderie is not common. I have had whites to beg me to hang around them, and I don't cater to white folk. I have found whites far more reliable than blacks. What a dilemma. Does that sound like a topic for discussion? Mr. Fuller says, minimize contact. But are we to talk to ourselves? Is there a blog for that? I'm not going to say the name, but that's the letter. I guess I'll go with the last one first. I do think that this should be a program, and I will make an effort to do a show about this specifically. I will try to do it on Sunday. Actually, if I do it on Sunday, it will have to be technically Monday. I can either do it Monday, or if you're on the East Coast, it would be the Late Late Show. So it would be technically East Coast 3 a.m. If you're on the West Coast, it would be midnight. So technically Monday morning. We could do it then if you would like a bigger audience. If there are folks who feel that's too late, that's not convenient for them to participate in the program, we can do it next Wednesday. Folks, you can send me some feedback. You can make a comment on the show page, or you can email me, whatever. Give me some feedback. But yes, I do think this warrants a program because other people have said the same thing. I think I have been pretty open in sharing that I avoid contact with non-white people. I have not had constructive contact with non-white people. My experience is that, we are combative, and we have been programmed to have total contempt for other non-white people, so especially black people. So I avoid contact, but I know a lot of non-white people, this is, a serious matter, and, you do get lonely, To my knowledge, we're human beings. You get lonely. You want to talk to somebody. You want to be around other folks and have a good time. So it is worthy of a program, I think, and I think a lot of people are very interested. The person who wrote this, you are not alone. I think a ton of non-white people who are attempting to counter racism, white supremacy, and inform themselves about how white supremacy works. They are struggling with the exact same issue. I am myself. So I know there are a lot of people who share your concerns and would be interested in hearing thoughts and suggestions on this. Let me see if I can answer any more of the other questions. The play I'm not familiar with, No Place to Be Somebody, although I would need more clarification around what being somebody means. My experience with black people in Atlanta, I'm in Seattle. That's all you need to know. I lived in Atlanta for not very long, but I'm in Seattle. That's all you need to know. I mean, it is, in my view, it is not good in a system of white supremacy when you have environments with a high concentration of black people. These are not going to be environments that you want to spend a lot of time in. I just saw, I've never seen more broken and defeated black males in my life, other than when I was in the city of Atlanta, Georgia. Not a good environment for black males at all. Nothing, absolutely nothing about being in Atlanta made me, nothing about Atlanta. And James Brown grew up in Georgia. And he talks about that in his book, about how it was tough being a black. He wrote in his autobiography, he talks about
double whammy.
To be a black male in Georgia, man. Yeah, those are my thoughts on Atlanta, particularly for black people. Yuck. Let's see, get any more of the questions that were in this letter. Yeah, I don't know what being somebody means. Just if you're a non-white person and a victim of white supremacy, I think, or at least my view, is it's about understanding that you are in an environment that has been precision crafted so that non-white people struggle to have constructive contact. We, non-white people, black people, we have been groomed to be in conflict with one another. So understanding that you adjust your expectations accordingly. The environments that I want to be in are environments where I can be constructive, environments where I have access to materials that are constructive and that I need to do constructive things. Those are environments I want to be in. Environments where I feel safe, environments where I can feel good. I mean, I want to be in an environment where, under conditions of racism, white supremacy, I can be as comfortable as possible so that I can work against this system. Understanding that this entire planet has been constructed so that I'm not comfortable, but I want to be as comfortable as possible so that I can do work against racism, white supremacy, and having to understand that the more comfort, the more privileges, the more access to resources that you get, the more you will probably have to concede to racist white supremacists and aid in the practice of racism white supremacy. So it's as much comfort as I can get while also being able to accept whatever I have to do to get access to these resources and this comfort. So finding a balance that I can live with, that's what it's about. Being in a space where I feel as safe as possible in a system of racism, white supremacy. That's more what I think about. Not, being around a lot of black people is not one of my concerns at this point. And in fact, I would probably not want to be around a lot of black people unless it was something really unique about these specific black people. And even then, that might not be a good idea because, it would be very easy for racist white supremacists to concentrate on a small collection of non-white people who are being constructive and are not being in conflict with one another. So those are my thoughts on that one. Let's see what next. Yeah, those are all the questions from the email. So, yes, we will do a show on this sometime in the next 7 days. You can shoot me an email to let me know about availability and when it would be most convenient for folks listening to the broadcast. I will go to the phone lines and see what folks, if they want to share any comments about today's program, anything that Professor Scheck shared with us, or anything else that we've discussed related to racism, white supremacy. I'm not going to do a whole lot of hanging out on the line today because I do have to prep for tomorrow's program, but we have about 15 minutes left, so everybody that called in, your line is open. Feel free to share if you have thoughts, comments, questions.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Oh, Gus, I had a follow-up on my question, but I couldn't follow up. It seems like the guest today was very informed, but I didn't feel like he even felt challenged, and I think he could have been practicing racism, white supremacy as well when he said the Germans did not have slavery until the late 1800s. And, to me, that sounded a little confusing on the message that was being portrayed.
What specifically was confusing?
Evidence.
Evidence.
Who started the slave trade in Germany? I didn't hear that since you know that there was no slave trade until the late 1800s. And it just seems like he was protecting Germany. Like, they wasn't as bad as everybody else. And, I don't know. It just sounds like he got off on easy street.
Not quite sure what you mean when you say he got off on easy street.
Wasn't as challenged as other guests.
Wasn't as challenged about what?
His sources and where did he get that information from? That Germany didn't practice in the slave trade, and they were just isolated from everybody else, and the peninsula of Europe.
Do you have evidence that Germany was involved in the slave trade? Because I haven't seen that in my studies of slavery.
I am not the expert on racism and white supremacy. I think that guy on the phone was. That's why I think he got off on the easy street. That's why.
But have you ever studied the slave trade? Because I've never seen Germany implicated. Not every European country was involved. Some we don't normally hear about were, but I've never heard of Germany being involved in the slave trade, but I know they definitely had colonies in Africa, and that was during the colonial period, which I think that was in the 1800s, but it wasn't the slave trade.
According to who? I mean, we got to get sources.
According to world history that you can get online and look up yourself, books written by black authors, books written by white authors. You can see which countries were involved in the slave trade. You can look up Germany, Africa, colonialism, and find out exactly where they had colonies, who they colonized, who they slaughtered. Like he said, the Herero, I'm aware of that. It's easy to get on the internet and look up and find out what countries were involved in the slave trade. You can even find documentation and records from those that did enslave Africans on where they took them from and where they took them to and what were the names of some of the tribes.
And it's easy to put anything on the internet and write disinformation as well.
Huh?
I said it's easy to receive disinformation as well. That's why I think people should be challenged when they write something or say something, and especially a white supremacist.
It's easy to receive what information?
And information from the internet or Google or wherever you want to get your information from. I just basically want to know where these sources come about. Is it an institution that's ran by racism and white supremacy? Because there's certain black scholars saying that the slave trade is a lot older than what they're telling you. So who do we really listen to? And while him protecting Germany, I think he should have been challenged a little bit more, in my opinion. But I could be misinformed.
I do want to point out. Well, go ahead.
Oh, I didn't feel like he was protecting Germany on that issue because in my research I've never found Germany connected with the African slave trade. Arabs have, like when you say it's much older than we think, that might be perhaps dealing with the Arab slave trade in Africa. But I've looked, I haven't found anything with Germany.
I do want to point out this program was, the focus of this program was not Germany's involvement in the slave trade or lack thereof. The focus of this program was about the massacre of victims of white supremacy, black people, by Germans. That was the focus of the program. So I really didn't have any intention of chatting about slavery, who was involved in it, who was not involved in it. So that's why I didn't, and it wasn't my question. I believe Mr. Nero brought that up. That was why I didn't address it. But yeah, I would definitely agree. System of white supremacy, everything should be questioned. You never know, who's presenting the information. A non-white person, they could be confused. They could have gotten incorrect information from a white person practicing racism. If it's a white person, they could be practicing racism. It's correct to be suspicious. So, yeah, I totally agree. Be suspicious. I wouldn't say challenge, but I would say question. Question and scrutinize. Question and scrutinize everything, everyone, just, to get them to produce evidence. But, yeah, the focus of the program was not the slave trade.
How did you find the pictures that you have under the show? What did you look up to find those?
I think I put in like German propaganda or I don't remember the exact search name. If you really press me on it, I can go back through my my browser history and see. But I was looking for propaganda because I already had a picture. I had an image picked already. I was satisfied with it. Was Hitler and his troops going to do their white supremacist thing. But yeah, I was just looking for, because he talks about it a lot in the book, about all this propaganda that the Germans had, white supremacist propaganda against black people. But he doesn't have pictures of it, but he talks about it in the footnotes. He has a ton of footnotes and other sources for articles, books, so on and so forth. And I was just Googling some of these different articles and such, and yeah, I did an image search, and it was just showing different images from Germany. I think I got to like the 7th or 8th page, and I saw those, and then I did some more research, and I found the guy's name who did those, and I searched his name, and just tons of stuff came up. So yeah, it was pretty easy once I got a name to attach to who did this. It's pretty easy to locate a lot of material like this, and they have whole books about this propaganda. I'm sorry.
The last one is horrible. When you were describing it, I wasn't looking at it, so I got to it later and was like, "Whoa, indeed, that goes with the crest theory." Yeah.
Yeah. The German, again on that, the black shame. That's what that says. The black shame.
You could be pregnant, you know. I do know as well from watching the Ma'afa 21 documentary that German eugenicists, I think this was before World War II, sometime during that period, they did work hand in hand with Planned Parenthood on abortion and eugenics and killing black people as well.
I believe that is correct. Yeah, a lot of that information. I don't know if Mark Crutcher talked about that specifically when he was here on the program, but yeah, that information is there, and they talk about the Rhineland bastards and how upset white people in Germany were about the pleasant presence of black people. So yeah, if you didn't see it, Ma'afa 21, very interesting.
And they sterilized a lot of black people there. And as well, there was Operation Paperclip after World War II, where the U.S. government took some of Nazi Germany's best scientists and even the eugenicists and brought them over here and put them to use in the U.S. Army. Look up Operation Paperclip. Anybody there?
Oh, I was listening intently.
Oh. No smoothies in the mail.
I'm sorry?
No smoothies in the mail.
No smoothies.
Cold.
I'm sorry?
I said that was cold.
Oh, it's all jokes. It's all jokes. I was appreciative. I thought that was great. But still, smoothie or no, replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Smoothie or no.
I agree, but smoothies don't hurt.
Can I be heard?
Sure. Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Greetings, Gus. I just want to thank you, sir, for having this show. This is something I had emailed you some information in regards to this. I feel that non-white people really don't have an accurate understanding of the enslavement era as well as the so-called Holocaust. Your guest did mention that he believes that 6 million Jews were massacred. I do not share his view on that. I think it may have been 6 million Africans that were massacred, to be honest with you. At least that's what I suspect. And I don't suspect we really have an accurate understanding of the enslavement era. And just to also respond to the piece, regarding the letter, and I want especially black people to keep this in mind. we really just now are beginning to have what some would call a friendship, some type of a relationship with each other. Because we went from breeding farms to being forced to be married. There was no courtship. There was no proper introduction. It could quite possibly be that as black males and black females came out of the enslavement era and began to have so-called marriages and relationships, that they were either engaging in sexual relations with someone that had been on a breeding farm or had possibly participated in breeding with a loved one, a family member, or someone else that's very close to that particular person. So I just like for us to kind of keep that in mind. There were no friends on a plantation. You didn't have that kind of a relationship with the other slave on that plantation. So I just like for us to kind of keep that in mind moving forward. That we have never had a healthy relationship in this area of the world. And then the last thing I want to say on that is this. Your guest mentioned that Germany did not have slaves. I do not believe that that's true. I believe that black African slaves were sent all over the world to all white nations. And any nation that says, especially any white nation that says that they did not participate in the slave trade, let them produce some form of government letter that was maybe written from their government to the governments that did participate in the slave trade, accusing them of an atrocity against people and saying that they should, discontinue this practice. I don't believe any country even protested our enslavement. So that's where I'm at with that. They're going to have to provide proof that they didn't have blacks, because the last time I checked the CIA's website, all European countries show a small remnant of having blacks amongst their population. And my question to people is, how did they get there? And why is the number so small? I'm finished.
I am not an expert on anything, so I am not qualified to speak either way. I am very ignorant about pretty much everything. Not too much I would qualify as an expert on. I do know we'll be back tomorrow with a white person who is an expert. He is the lead investigator for the Southern Poverty Law Center, Mark Potok. He will be here tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Central, 1 p.m. Pacific. Mark Potok of the Southern Poverty Law Center. As I said, we'll be back every day until Tuesday. Every day we'll have at least one program. Dr. Martin Kevorkian on Saturday. Kevin Annette on Sunday. Tim Wise is scheduled to be here Sunday as well. Irritated Jeannie on Monday. And Gwen Ragsdale should have her husband as well, Justin Ragsdale of the Lest We Forget Slavery Museum in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That should be from tomorrow through Tuesday, the roster of folks to be here. Again, hope the program was of constructive value. Thank you for the folks tuning in. And smoothies are fantastic. Fantastic. I would love a smoothie if I could get one or 5. Definitely healthy way to go. Much better than chitlins. I would take a smoothie over chitlins or a lot of the other stereotypical stuff that is associated with black people. I would take a smoothie any day with flaxseed if I can get it. But yeah, if you want to do something to help Gus in light of a smoothie, share the program. Tell folks to check it out. Put it on Facebook or Twitter. If you have a webpage. You can put the player on your site, only if you find the program of constructive value. That will be like everybody out there. Khadijah, she's great. She always posts the show. Thank you so much. I hope it is constructive. That's like a little warm internet smoothie every time I see someone sharing the program with someone else. So that'll be my cyber smoothie. Let's see. Other than that, yeah, I think that will do us for the day. Please support Cree's broadcast as well, Counter-Racist Evolving Engineer, right here at Blog Talk Radio. Her blog supported as well. Her blog, cree7.wordpress.com. Again, cree7.wordpress.com. We will be back tomorrow. I will be preparing in the meantime. Yep, I think that's going to wrap it. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you so much for tuning in to the broadcast, and replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Thank you, guys.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At CounterRacism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by CounterRacism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.